Thanks for tuning in to the Drive On podcast, where we're focused on giving hope and strength to the entire military community. Whether you're a veteran, active duty, guard, reserve, or a family member, this podcast will share inspirational stories and resources that are useful to you. I'm your host, Scott DeLucio, and now let's get on with the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Drive On podcast. Today, my guest is Dr. Jason Piccolo. Jason is an Army veteran, former special agent and supervisor with the Department of Homeland Security, former U.S. Border Patrol agent near the Mexico border, and went on to work with the White House Security Council's human smuggling cell. He's also an author and fellow podcaster of the awesome show called The Protectors. And I don't know where you have time for squeezing me in all of this. So welcome to the show, Jason.
I've always got time for you, brother. I appreciate you having me on the show. You know, that's one thing brother. I like getting on other people's shows and not, sometimes it's just nice to have a good conversation in a different format. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm glad to have you on. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background for anyone who might not be familiar with who you are and what you've been up to?
Yeah, in the 90s, I was enlisted artillery guy, 13 Bravo, active duty. Got out, joined the Guard and Intel unit, did some HUMINT for a little bit, but I also went to college, commissioned as an infantry officer. Instead of going back active duty, I went into the U.S. Border Patrol, did that for a bit. Then I became a special agent with the former U.S. Customs working narcotics trafficking. That turns into ICE later on. In between all of this stuff, I get recalled in 2005, get sent to Benning for a while, then Shelby, then to Kuwait, and then from Kuwait to Iraq. Came back from that, went to work as an Army civilian CID agent working the Guantanamo Bay investigations. Then I went to work for another DOD agency, then ICE, and now I work for another federal agency right now as a special agent. So yeah, man, in between there, I got a bunch of education, raised some kids, and I started my podcast, The Protectors, back in 2019. Yeah, I think. And I love podcasting, man. That's like my outlet. That is like my therapy, as you know well.
Right. Yeah, I have to agree 100% with that. I mean, it's just something that when I started, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I just kind of fell into it. I started doing it, and I didn't really know how much I would do it and how much I would even enjoy it. But after I started talking to some guests and going through it, it really does become almost like a therapy where you just get to chat with some people, hear some incredible stories, and learn a few things along the way. And it's in a selfish way, I like to learn things. And when I get to talk to all these great guests, these smart people that I've had on the show, it's helping me improve myself as well, and hopefully other people as well. But in a selfish way, I'll take it.
No, that's the thing is I get something. It's like when I go to counseling and stuff like that. Well, actually, I haven't been to counseling in years, but when I used to go, I'd always get something out of it. And it's the same way when I have a podcast and when I'm a guest on a podcast, I learn something new, whether it's about me or about someone else or something I could either improve on myself or something that I'm like, wow, I didn't know I was doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's the nice thing about having all these different perspectives and points of view that you get from these different guests and the people that, other podcasts that you might go on and things like that. You get so much, different perspective, and it just opens your eyes to things that you might just be missing because you just, I don't know, you didn't think about it, or didn't think that way about whatever the issue was. So it's really great.
Well, the cool thing too is you find new information out. Right now we don't talk. I hardly ever talk politics on my show, but I've been a part of the political spectrum for a while. But the thing about podcasts is you get more information out of them than you do in mainstream TV now. Whether, I listen to a lot of Rogan, I listen to a lot of different back and forth between other different people, and just to get different perspectives on things that aren't sound bites. And with the podcast, you have to, even a short format's 20, 30, 40 minutes. So you're getting some decent information out of there.
Yeah, it is. And if you think about the time that you could spend sitting, in front of your television watching Netflix or whatever, and what are you really getting out of that entertainment? And it's good to kind of just unwind and unplug for a little bit, but it's also nice to be learning things too. And if you can spend that same amount of time watching or listening to a podcast instead of just droning on about something else on, Netflix or whatever, then, you're improving yourself, you're bettering yourself. And I think that's a win. So it's cool that, that you found your way into podcasting. I think we both started probably around the same time. I think I was 2019 as well. So, it's just a good thing to do, and I'm glad you're doing it as well, because I enjoy listening to some of the conversations you've had on your show, and it's just a fun thing to do, I think. So um let's talk about your career, kind of go back a little bit. You've done an awful lot in your career, and I'll be honest, you don't look old enough to have packed that much experience into your life. So I'm going to just go what you started young, like a child prodigy or something. But uh, what got you into the military? What is sort of the background on that? What got you into the military, and kind of follow along from there, I guess.
Well, as we record this show, I am 12 months and 26 days away from 50.
Okay.
So there we go. I've packed a lot in because, as you know, when you join the military, a lot of times you join when you're young, or after you matured a little bit. And the reason I went into the military is, like, since I was a kid, I wanted to be a soldier and a cop, soldier and a cop. So I thought in order to become a cop, I'd have to become a soldier. So I have, I don't know, man. I never wanted to go artillery. But I don't know if I've ever told this story on a podcast. So maybe this will be an exclusive.
Awesome.
So I'm 20 years old. I just turned 20. And I'm like, what am I going to do with my life? It's one of those things where, like, I went to community college. I didn't have the best childhood in the world, so I didn't do too good in community college. In fact, I failed out. And then I was like, you know what? I was working on a survey crew at the time, and I'm carrying the gear, and I'm like, I could be doing something better with my life. So I go down, and I wanted to try it. I want to get my feet tested, feet in the water first. So I joined the U.S. Army Reserves, and back then the reserves had infantry. So I joined a unit that had 11 Charlie, and it was a mech infantry unit. I didn't know much about it. I just knew it was infantry. So, like, back then you can go to drill before you go to basic training. I think you can still do that. So I go down there, I'm drilling. I go talk to the commander. I go, hey, how's it going, man? I'm like, I didn't know about all this shit. Like, after basic training, when can I go to Ranger School and Airborne School and all that? And he goes, what? He goes, we're mech. If we're lucky, we might get one Ranger slot every few years. And that usually goes to, like, you have to go through a board and all this other stuff or something like that. And I was like, oh, there's no way. I'm like, I got to go active duty. So I go to my recruiter, and this is in East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. And I go, hey, I want to go active duty. I want to go infantry. I want to go airborne, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, oh, yeah. All we have to do is file a hardship letter, right? That you can't afford to live on the outside world, and you have to go active duty. I didn't know any better. I was just a dumb kid, like, oh, okay, it's just a piece of paper, and blah, blah, blah. And he's thinking to himself, he's like, oh yeah, I'm going to get an active duty stat. So I go in there, I file this hardship, the reserve unit, it's a pain in the butt, back and forth, back and forth. And then what happens was, he goes, okay, I'm going to bring you down to MEPS. And he brings me down to MEPS, I think the end of August, early September, almost the end of the fiscal year, right? So I go down to MEPS. And a MEPS guy goes, hey, you know what? The only thing we have available, I think, was a carpenter. In my head, it was always carpenter and artillery. And I'm like, artillery? I'm like, you're crazy. I go, no. He goes, look, you file the hardship. By the time you get your paperwork shuffled, and we can get you back in the system, he's giving me this big line of, baloney. And he goes, you file the hardship. We can get you out of here in 2 weeks. These are your options. He goes, hey, look, you're going artillery. It's combat arms. You can do all those fancy schools. And I'm like, okay. So then that's how I ended up in artillery. And then I go to basic training. I'm down to Fort Sill. And a funny story, I don't know if I ever told this one either, is you remember a movie with Pauly Shore called In the Army Now?
I do. Yes.
Well, he was there when I was in basic training, learning about the Army at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. So he was walking around our chow hall, walking around everywhere, and We're like, oh my gosh, it's Pauly Shore. And you know, for the people out there who aren't as old as I am, Pauly Shore was a big thing at one time. And so that was funny, man. But then when I get to my artillery unit, it's in Colorado, Fort Carson, 4th ID, and it's mechanized artillery, you know, 155s. And I'm like, oh, and 109s. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I did that for a bit. And, you know, when I got out, I ended up eventually branching infantry. But it's just so weird how many people have recruiter stories. That same recruiter ended up sleeping with one of his private's wives and taking all these Polaroids. The only thing that saved him was his face wasn't in the Polaroids. And this is pre cell phone and pre data and everything, you know. What a
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty awful having a recruiter go and do that, you know, behind your back to one of the
yeah.
privates. That's, I mean, I've always heard of recruiters who have screwed over the recruits, but
Yes.
never in that way. You know?
Oh my gosh.
Uh,
That's how I ended up in the military. But you know, I don't discount my service in the 90s at all. No, not at all. Joining a guard was cool because in the summers, I would, you know, I became a cadet too. So then in the summers for like 30, 60, 90-day tours, I would, what do you call it, burn marijuana and do the counter drug mission for the guard. So
okay.
we go out there, we cut the weed down, we burn it. Either it's, you know, just hemp fields or it's like, you know, grows. And the DEA guys would just be feeding us hamburgers and Gatorade all day, man. It was fun, man. So we just go out there, we cut weed all day with like industrial sized, you know, shredders and everything else you can imagine. And I got bit by so many hornets or bees or whatever in those summers that it was unbelievable. As soon as you cut the weed down, man, I'm like, come on.
Well, so it that gave you a good base for your future career in law enforcement. So
Yeah.
after the military, you switch over to the law enforcement side. So what made you want to make that switch? How did you learn about the law enforcement side from anybody, or what caused you to go in that direction?
Yeah. My best friend that I met in Fort Hood, Texas, ended up going to the U.S. Border Patrol. And I was like, what the hell's the Border Patrol? So I remember going like spring break during college, went down to the southwest border, San Diego, and he brings me up in the mountains. And here I am with my, you know, my damn running shoes on, jeans, and a t-shirt. And we're out there tracking aliens up in the mountains. And I'm like, oh, this is fun, man. I got to do this. So when I graduated college, I went through the process for the Border Patrol, and I ended up getting the same exact station as him. So it was like unbelievable. So I ended up, his wife at the time was my training officer. And then he would always come and steal me, and we'd go and, you know, track aliens all day. And eventually I got onto an ATV unit with him. So we drive ATVs at night. We worked a midnight shift, and that was awesome, man. You can't, you know, you can't beat that experience. So that's how I got into law enforcement. And the Border Patrol was interesting because when you get to the academy, you're a civilian, but it's a paramilitary type academy. So you're wearing uniforms, you got to shine boots and gig lines and all the other stuff. You're supposed to look squared away, you're supposed to iron your uniform. And you have a lot of civilians there. And you have a lot of prior service, but some of the civilians don't understand. So I remember we had this one guy and he couldn't take it. It was like 2 weeks. He was there. He was like, I can't take this. And he he leaves all his stuff in his room and he goes out. And this is Glencoe, Georgia. It's an old Navy base, I think it is. FLETC, Federal Law Enforcement Training Center down there. And he climbs the fence and he leaves, thinking that he's going AWOL. And I'm like, we're all like, bro, this is a civilian job. You just say you don't want it and you leave. So it's just you can't make it up, man. And these are the type of people like, you know, I love law enforcement, man, but some of the people that make it through and get in, you're just like, come on, bro, where did you come from?
Yeah, I mean, I live in Arizona, so I've seen people who have been walking through the desert for quite some time. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I live up in the Phoenix area, which is probably, I don't know, 150, 200 miles or so from the Mexican border. So for people to be walking up in this area, they've been walking for quite a while, you know.
Yeah, I
Um,
lived out in Sierra Vista for a while. And then when I was in the border patrol, I was detailed out in Ajo, which is,
okay,
you know, it's right near it's on the border, but it's like
yeah,
out in the middle of nowhere, Arizona.
yeah. So I mean, That job I can only imagine, especially down there in that area. You're probably seeing much more frequent than what we see up here. Just because of the proximity to the border and everything. But my gosh, I can only imagine what the stories that you might have and the things that have come across the border and the people that you've seen and things like that. It's got to be pretty incredible.
It was interesting, man, because later on when I became a special agent, I ended up going to what they call high intensity drug trafficking area group, which is a DEA task force. DEA, and at the time it was customs and state and local law enforcement. Once in a while, you get an ATF guy. And I was literally like 2 miles away from my other border patrol station. And I had no idea all these drugs were coming across the border right there, like in cargo containers and everything else. So it's weird how in law enforcement you don't know what's going on around you if you're working certain crimes. Like a lot of times when you're a police patrol, you don't realize that, hey, you know what? There's human trafficking going on here. There's drug dealing going on there. There's terrorism here. There's this, that, and everything, unless you get exposed to it. So there's a lot in law enforcement that's not just clear cut. It's not just, okay, we're going to go after these people for this, breaking this violation and doing this and that.
Yeah. Now, you briefly mentioned, counseling and things like that earlier. And, part of this podcast, we're talking about, the mental health and the things that people have experienced and stuff like that. And, I look at someone like yourself and you've clearly accomplished a lot throughout your life. And so, whatever troubles and things that you've gone through before, you still managed to not let those things kind of overwhelm and consume your life basically. So what was that process like for you? When you at some point you decided, you needed to talk to somebody, go to the counseling and whatever. What was that process like for you, and what kind of led you there, and how did that turn out for you?
Well, I think I have different types of, I think a lot of people, some people get stuck in their childhood, like their childhood trauma, it transcends their life.
Yeah.
Me, I kind of compartmentalize my life. My childhood is my childhood. That seems like a completely different person. It was a semi-broken childhood. I was on someone else's podcast the other day and I talked about it for the first time about getting kicked out, coming back. My dad leaves. My mom tries to kill herself. And then I move out for good, when I was in high school. Luckily, I had friends, so I can go live with them. But yeah, I was motivated, different type of motivation. But in knowing how the system can fail you as far as like the educational system. And because back then, if you were a broken kid, they would just say, okay, you know what? I was on a college prep track. They said, okay, we're going to put you down in a general track. You go over there, just leave us alone and get out of there. I compartmentalize that. I figure, hey, you know what? I joined the army. I did everything. I'm self-made. Later on, I have different types of trauma throughout the years. And if there was a time in my life around about 2011, 2012, where I was very numb. I was very, very numb, like that suicidal numb. And it was different than ideation, I think, because it wasn't just like, oh, wow, suicide, cool. It was more like, wow, if I kill myself, everybody will be better off. And it'll be like, well, But it was such a numb spot. So that's when I first started seeing a counselor. And then that's when I first started taking some anxiety meds, general prescribed anxiety meds, to kind of get my brain focused, to get on track. I don't really suggest prescription. I suggest, finding some sort of mental therapy. And like we talked about before with the podcasting and talking to people and being open has helped me so much over the years. I've gone back and forth with counselors. And one thing I always caution people is when you go to a counselor for the first time and you don't like them, there's not a fit, go to another counselor right away. Don't give them 2 or 3 shots. You have to fit. And there's plenty of counselors out there. Either they're educated, they're not educated, they have certificates, but there are plenty of people that could give you the mental health help that you need. but it might not necessarily be that 22-year-old kid who's just kind of, hey, you know what? I think it'd be kind of cool if I go talk to some vets or I go talk to some LEOs and check the block and move on. The counselor I ended up for a long time with was a lady in her 60s, kind of liberal. But then what caught me was, we started talking about zombie apocalypse. And it was just random conversation. And we would have conversations. But every time I left that session, I got something out of it. And it wasn't like, oh, man, if I kill a zombie that way, it was like, no, my brain, I can adapt to it. Because as well as I do, like you can read a lot of books, you can do a lot of research, you can be as educated as possible. And believe me, that is one of the reasons I got so much education. And I say it that way, facetiously, is because I have to keep focused. I have to have different things going on. You mentioned in the beginning about how do you do all this? Well, that's the other mental health help thing I do for myself is I keep focused. For the longest time, I give this speech all the time about my professional resume and my personal resume. For the longest time, I was working on his professional resume, which included a master's, a doctorate, every certificate you could possibly imagine. But around 42, 43 years old, I was like, why am I doing all of this? For what? For a job? I had a job. I have a job. I need something to do that's for my personal resume, something that's going to keep me mentally going. And that's why I do the podcasting. That's why I write. I write a lot of op-eds. I write books. It's something I enjoy. And I don't do it because it's a job. Same thing with the podcast. I don't do it for money. I do it because I love talking. Any media I do, any TV appearances and stuff, I like talking about law enforcement stuff. So I go on the news. If I want to champion a cause, I'll write an article about it. If I want to talk to another podcaster and see what they're up to, I'll do that. So you have to, it all comes down to finding stuff to keep your mind focused. Because when it starts wandering, when it gets off mission, that's the other thing. This is all a mission to me. These are my missions. They're not a mission to get another job. They're not getting a mission. They're a mission to keep me mentally healthy.
That's a pretty important mission to have. And when you're that focused on that particular mission, it's hard to get off course where you're going to really focus on accomplishing that goal. And when you're doing things like the podcast, like you said, you're not getting paid for this, but this is benefiting you in other ways that money isn't going to benefit you. So to me, it's a smart move to do things like that and move away from that numb feeling that you're having and do things that matter to you and give you a sense of purpose and a sense of direction and meaning.
Well, on top of that, I'm raising 2 kids, but you see, that's how I compartmentalize things. So tonight, I think I emailed you and I said, hey, look, I got to push the podcast back a little bit because I told my daughter, I'm like, every day we're going to practice soccer. So I know I want to spend as much time with my kids so I could break off for 30, 40 minutes to a podcast and I'll go back upstairs and I'll do everything. When I'm editing my podcast, I have a little laptop thing. I sit in front of the TV with them or I sit with them and do something. So we're spending time together. If while we were watching a movie anyway, I could do all my editing and stuff. But that's the other thing too, is I want to focus on things that are cool, like hanging with the kids and stuff like that. I talked about before about my childhood. And I remember when I was a kid, one of the times my dad left was my parents left me home during Christmas. I think I was 14 or 15. They didn't want to go on vacation because I was a pain in the ass. So they went up. My mom came home on Christmas Day and she's like, your dad and I are getting a divorce for like the 50th time. And I was like, okay. So since then, I never really liked Christmas. But then a couple Christmases ago, I'm like, you know what? I'm like, it's not about me. Now it's about my 2 awesome kids and about the joy in their eyes and everything else. So I discounted all that crap in my childhood and flushed that part away and said, now I have these awesome kids and I'm building memories with them.
Yeah, and important thing to keep in perspective too, because if you are making Christmas a kind of a miserable experience in your house as your kids are growing up, then that's going to move on and continue on in their lives as they get older and potentially have kids of their own. And will that just make your grandchildren have that miserable Christmas experience as well? And you don't want to do that. You don't want that hanging over your
Nah,
conscience.
nah, it's all
So
good stuff, man. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell when it comes to mental health.
yeah.
One thing I have been doing is I'm trying to get, and this is one thing I don't think I posted a couple things about it. And your show kind of talks about that. I'd like to just get this stuff out there, but testosterone, I'm as I'm reaching 50, my testosterone levels are like, they drop to like nil. I'm like, what's going on? I'm like, why am I exhausted all the time? Why am I just fatigued? I'm like, I'm happy, I'm mentally happy. Sometimes I get a little beat up and down, but I'm like, man, why do like 2 o'clock in the afternoon? I just hit a wall. Get my testosterone checked, and my testosterone levels are down. Now I got to go see an endocrinologist. But these are the type of things you don't think about. You don't. I don't think about my health, but now I'm like, you know what? How do you get your testosterone up without drugs? And I'm probably going to have to take some sort of drugs or something. But the other thing is like lift heavy. So now I go to the gym all the time, and I'm like, I got to boost this stuff up to get my mental health, so I don't get back to those numb days.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that after you said that, it didn't just clicked with me, and wasn't even something I would have considered was testosterone dropping and things like that. Like I'm a guy, I should be able to just make what I need, right? Like that's just what we
Well,
do, isn't it? But
well, the
I guess
funniest thing
not, right?
about it was like I was talking to another guy, another vet, and we do this. I got to talk about the racing thing in a minute too, but he was like, yeah, he's like, and he's a really fit dude. And he's like, yeah, my testosterone was like, you know, I think it's like 200 out of, and it's supposed to be 100. No, it's 200. It's supposed to be like 800 because that's kind of what
Okay.
mine is now. And he's like, you should get a check. So as soon as I got home, I went, got some blood work done, got a referral from my doctor, and everything's telemedicine now. And then I got an appointment with an endocrinologist, and then I got more blood work drawn, and it's all video. So anybody out there who's thinking about it, you could do a lot of this stuff online. But if you are thinking about it, do it now, because there's a lot of times it takes a while to get into a doc. So now I got to go back January 4th for the next thing. That's where I find out if I'm going to be taking, there's like a gel you rub on your shoulder. It's weird. Or you could take,
Okay.
yeah, I'm like a gel. I'm like, that's kind of weird. And then she's like, well, you have little kids. I'm like, no, my kids are like 11 and 13. I'm like, they're not going to be like jumping on my shoulders. There's a patch that you put on your shoulder or your ass, I think, or there's injections, all to boost your testosterone up. And from what I understand is like if you do the testosterone replacement therapy or testosterone therapy, that it's like it completely changes your life. And I'm like, damn, I can't wait. I'm like, let's get
Yeah,
this
I mean,
going.
that just you know could change so many things for people who maybe didn't even consider that. And prior to whatever it was 5 minutes ago when you started talking about that, I was one of those people. I hadn't even considered that could be something off balance in
Well,
my own
it's
life.
fatigue is huge. Fatigue,
Yeah.
sexual dysfunction. And I'm just going to say, you have to be blunt with this shit. It's, sometimes there's sexual issues that happen, but definitely the fatigue thing. And there was a few other things like sensitive parts of your nether regions, all sorts of different things. But anybody check out testosterone, and it doesn't matter. My friend that got it was in his 30s too
Yeah.
when he started, and like me in the 40s. And, just check it out.
Yeah, that's something that you think, okay, well, I'm young, I'm in my 30s or
Mhm.
40s or whatever you happen to be. It's like, I got a couple decades before I need to even start worrying about that stuff. And I guess not, right? I mean, that's something that
Mhm.
can crop up on just about anybody, at even younger ages. I don't know how young typically that starts to affect people, but that's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up because, um, I know for me, I hadn't even considered that as something
And I
that
tell you
could
what
be
is so
off.
simple. You go to your general practitioner and say, hey, look, my testosterone's on. And even my doctor was like, well, you don't really have a lot of the symptoms. And don't take that, say, look, I just want blood work.
Yeah.
So she's like, well, you only have, the only thing symptom you have is really fatigue and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, can I just go take vials of blood? So I get my blood taken, and she's like, and now everything's email, like this secure. And she's like, your testosterone is very low. I'd like you to get that checked out. I'm like, yeah, I know.
Well, I mean, it's I think another lesson in that too is be your own advocate for your own health, whether it's mental health or physical health, whatever it is. You should advocate for that. If you think something's off with you, you're going to probably know better than anybody else, including your doctor, if something's
Well,
feels off. You've
yeah.
been living with yourself for however old you are. You've been living with yourself all this time, and you should be able to know if something is off. So
Well, that's
push
the
for
other
it.
thing too, is like, I was in Balad, and Balad was like the burn capital of the world. And so now I have, my gallbladder was taken out when I was 42. I get, my lungs are all jacked up. I wake up with mucus in the morning, sleep apnea, and I get, and I'd like people. The reason I'm so blunt about this stuff is because I want other people to learn from my lessons. I get blood blisters all over my body now. So if I lift up my shirt, I got like all these little dots, and it's almost like toxicity is coming out of my body. It's so weird, and it's like all these different things. And you go to the VA, and I go and I put in for the disability compensation, and they're like, oh, we need to take x-rays of your lungs. That's not good. But they never tell you the results. Same thing with the gallbladder. Well, we don't really know if you had your gallbladder out. I'm like, well, the scars are here, and here's some. And then you do the lung capacity test. I'm like, well, what does it say? And she goes, well, we don't really give out the results. I'm like, so you have to be your own advocate. So my next thing is,
Yeah.
now I got to go to my own personal doctors and have all these different symptoms and everything checked out. So it's like, you have to really be your own advocate. Nobody's going to
You
do it
do.
for you.
Yeah, and honestly, there's a lot of great doctors out there, a lot of people who are doing great work for the veterans, for just, I don't know, their patients in general. But there's nobody on the face of the planet who's going to care more about your own physical or mental health than you. And
Mm.
they may care a lot, but they're not going to care as much as you are, because that pain in your back or your knees or your neck or whatever it is not their pain. they're not
No.
they're not feeling it every time they stand up or turn around too quick or something. They're not feeling those things, or
Mm-hmm.
every time they take a deep breath, right? They're not feeling those things, but you are. And so clearly that's going to matter more to you than it's going to matter to them, right?
Yeah, brother. There's a lot of things, I need to write a book about all the bullshit lessons learned rather than, because I wrote a book about my time working the border and kids and smuggling and all that. But if I could partake anything, the biggest thing is always saying about the personal and professional resume and working on your mental health that way, and not just focusing on these jobs.
Yeah. And you mentioned your books, and I want to be sure to give you some time to talk about your books. Tell us a little bit about those, where people can find them and everything like that.
I wrote a couple books. I price them at cost, because that's another thing. It's like, I feel really guilty about trying to make money on anything, man. I'm like, I have all this protector swag, and what I do is I mark it up like 30%, just so I could pay costs of the podcast and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But branding and all the other crap. But the same thing with the books. I'm like, I just feel guilty about selling my books. My next book though will be like, I'm not gonna, once we get off what the next book's about. I think I told you about that, but we'll talk about that off the air. But yeah, with that one, I might try to make some money, because I'm gonna, I'm gonna put thousands of hours into it. So,
Well, you know
but yeah,
what though? I think if you're gonna spend the time writing a book, even if it's just about
yeah,
your own personal experiences, I don't know.
you know
I
what,
don't
bro?
see it the same way.
You know what? I'm starting to not see it that way, because now my book's been out for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
And well, I have a mini book, which is like 80 pages. That's a primer on the Southwest border and about the unaccompanied alien children and how that whole process works. But the other one is, my memoir about like working at border and drugs and working up for the White House and Security Council and all that stuff. And I'm like, I really actually want to start doing book signings now. I want to
Yeah.
go out and I want to sit down and, whatever. I might actually take that book and do a third edition, because right now it's on a second edition, and
Okay.
update it with the past 3 years. Because I've done so much crazy crap in the past 3 years that, like, and here's the thing is, like, I'm not going to go into the whistleblowing story, because I think if you Google my name and you figure it out, but I am a federal whistleblower that legally blew the whistle on, some heinous stuff that was happening to little kids on the border and throughout the country. Um, and so that's why I wrote the book, so I could raise awareness about that.
Yeah.
That is the only reason that I've ever started a podcast, media, books, anything. So I'm always thinking to myself, I'm like, if I didn't blow the whistle, where would I be right now? I'm like, I certainly wouldn't be talking to you. I certainly wouldn't have a podcast, because I didn't even think about podcasts. I did Mike Ritland's podcast, and I was like, this is kind of cool. I'm like, I should do this. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
if I want to promote anything, it's the podcast. Everybody, the books are out there, but you know what? Thank you for. There is going to be a third edition of my book. I think I'll do an updated third edition book. How's that sound? I think I'll work on it for the next few months. But yeah, check out the Protectors podcast. That is like my pride and joy right now.
Okay.
And with the pride and joy comes, it's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and not really a lot of blood, not really tears, but a lot of sweat, man. There's 300 something episodes. I think I have 280 something audio, and I used to do a bunch of live shows, and I love it, man. I've had so many awesome guests on, yourself included, and I love talking to people, man. I had the Call of Duty endowment on. And so there's an endowment from Call of Duty. I didn't even know this. What they do is, if you play Call of Duty, there's map packs, not map packs, but packs that you can get, and they give money to uh, different organizations. And Call of Duty endowment actually works with Hire Heroes USA and Vets and a bunch of others to get vets hired. And I think they've got 90,000 vets hired. They've spent $35 million, and 100% of what goes into that goes to getting vets hired. There's no in this corporate bullshit that you've seen with a lot of nonprofits. So it's pretty cool, man. Had that. And then, I mean, the authors that have been on the show, man, like Jack Carr, Brad Taylor, I got a name drop, but there's awesome Scott DeLuzio. I mean, it's fun, man. It's fun. And I love talking to regular people, man. I've had so many regular, just everyday protectors on the show too, and I love it.
I mean, that's great. And I'm grateful first off for being able to join you on your podcast. I think it was a great time. It was a great conversation. And I think with everything that you're doing, you know, basically just giving back, right? I mean, I mean, the type of person you are, you're talking about, these books that you've written and everything. You're not looking to make a profit on any of this stuff. You're just giving that information out there, and it's, at cost, so obviously there's a cost involved to make a book, but you're doing that for basically nothing. And with the podcast, you're not making any money off of the podcast. I'm not making any money on the podcast. We're just doing it to give back, right?
I do have to say though, is like I do have sponsors for the show now. I
Okay.
just got some. And it's like I'm not
Excellent.
really making money. I've probably put 25, 30 grand into this show. So I'm probably, and then it's like probably like 50 to 100 a month just to run it with all the different
Yeah.
platforms and all that. So I'm basically, I live in about a year with these same sponsors. If I don't get any more, I might break even.
There you
So
go. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, for sure, it definitely. uh, I'm definitely operating at a loss with with the podcast.
I know, man.
It's definitely draining out of my own personal funds and everything, but it's fine because
Yeah.
what I'm getting out of this is knowing that I'm out here trying to help other people, other veterans,
Mm-hmm.
and making their
Therapy. It's
lives
like, hey, you
better.
know what? Oh, I'm paying into my therapy sessions right now.
There it is. Yeah, exactly. And so it's a great thing that you're doing. I'm really grateful that there's people like you out there who are doing this type of stuff, having these conversations with these people, and really spreading this information out there. I think it's really great. And with the protectors, you're telling the stories of the people who are the people who are out there protecting us, and really being the selfless type of people who are out there day in and day out, making our communities and our country a safer, better place. So it's really great.
Yeah, brother. I appreciate you having me on. Talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad to have this conversation. And if you ever do get around to doing some sort of book signing, let me know and we can maybe team up and tackle that together. Cause I love getting out there and doing stuff like that too. So maybe we can do some sort of joint thing together. That would be cool.
Well, I didn't even think about it before until right now, but I am gonna retouch up my book and throw another 5 or 6 chapters into it.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. Well, Jason, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. Where can people go to get in touch with you, find out more about what you do, and everything else?
The best thing to do is check out Jason Piccolo, JASONPICCOLO .us, our protectors.us, our Google Jason Piccolo. Instagram is my favorite at Dr. Jason Piccolo. And subscribe to the Protectors podcast. And thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will have links to all of this in the show notes, all these links, so you can find them easily there. And they'll be there as long as this episode's available. As long as I keep on doing this, that episode is going to be here. So, yeah, those links will be there. So check it out. Definitely go and subscribe to the Protectors podcast as well. Make sure you get the one with Jason Piccolo, because I know there has been some issue with some other branding issues and things like that. So make sure you get the one with the handsome gentleman on the cover there. So, all right. Again, thank you for joining me. And I really appreciate the time you took to come on the show today.
Thanks a lot, brother.
Thanks for listening to the Drive On Podcast. If you want to check out more episodes or learn more about the show, you can visit our website, driveonpodcast.com. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube at Drive On Podcast.